Hello Team Spanaway, here to make my guest post again. This time I was asked to talk about peri-workout nutrition. Peri meaning around, so your pre-workout, your intra-workout, and your post-workout nutrition. So we're just going to kind of go through each of these three potential feeding windows, more on that later, and talk about what our goals are and how we can achieve those in no particular order. So the first window is going to be our pre-workout window. One of the goals we are going to be looking at that point is consuming an energy source, namely a carbohydrate, because carbohydrates are the preferred energy source for anaerobic activity in the human body, and preferably something that doesn't upset your stomach. This can look as simple as rice, potentially a bagel, cream of rice, cream of wheat, oats, anything that really doesn't bother your stomach, sits well, should probably do the job. We're looking to eat this carbohydrate source probably about 45 minutes to an hour away from training. The other thing that you're going to have with this meal is a protein source. If we're trying to maximize our muscular growth, we want to be eating a relatively even amount of protein spaced throughout the day, and this is just one of those spaces. The next thing is going to be managing our hydration status. What does that look like? Well, so the first and foremost thing is water intake. It's hard to give general guidelines for water intake because the amount we lose through sweat varies pretty heavily, but one number that you can throw out there is 1 milliliter for every calorie expended during the day. So if you're someone who burns through 2,000 calories over a course of a day, you're going to be looking at 2,000 milliliters of water. I might aim to get, depending on what time of day you train, I would aim to get at least half of that daily water intake prior to training. But the other part of hydration status that's often overlooked is your ability to retain said water. So carbohydrates, as we are intaking, is going to help us with that. But the other side of the equation is having a electrolyte intake that is proportionate to our water intake. How can we do this in practical application? Well, the two most readily abundant electrolytes you're going to have are going to be sodium and potassium. So sodium, relatively easy. Just make sure that you salt that pre-workout meal to taste. Not so much that it's disgusting, and not so little that you can't taste it. Just the amount you like will probably end up being enough. If this is something you routinely have problems with, potentially putting a little bit of salt in your water or just having a thermotab prior to training, if that's something you find you need to increase. And then potassium. How can we get potassium? Well, probably the easiest way is, a banana, coconut water, or potatoes. Those are three very easy ones. Most berries, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, all also have a very reasonable amount of potassium in them. So trying to put those in your diet prior to training can also be beneficial for your hydration status as well. The last thing I want to touch on in the pre-workout window is, where are your fats for this meal? We are going to want them low to moderate. Long story short, fats are a little bit harder to digest, a little bit longer to digest, and we don't want blood rushing to our organs when we're training. Preferably, we would like blood rushing to our muscles. And a high-fat meal is going to have the unintended effect, right? So the only thing that I would say might bump you to moderate is if you are someone who knows if you eat a low-fat meal, you digest it very quickly, your blood glucose spikes and then crashes while you're training. If this is something you can observe happening for yourself, you might want to introduce 10, 15, maybe 20 grams of fat to your pre-workout meal to slow down that digestion and flatten out that blood glucose curve. But that's something that you don't have to do if you don't have a problem with it. So moving on to the next feeding window we would be looking at, we're looking at intra-workout nutrition. This is a pretty controversial one. Powerlifters really like eating candy while they train. That is probably not best practice, especially because most powerlifting workouts are not rigorous enough to deplete our intramuscular glycogen stores. If you like eating candy while you train, that's one thing, but don't tell yourself you're doing something more grand than you are. The most important thing we can do while we train is continue to manage our hydration status. So intaking another amount of water while we train, and preferably intaking electrolytes proportionate to that water intake. So what might that look like? It might look like putting a bit of salt, a palatable amount, not that it tastes like salt, into your water or Gatorade or whatever you might be drinking to taste. Or it could look like drinking coconut water or those body armors. Those are just flavored coconut water. They tend to be pretty heavy in potassium, a very good way to get in potassium, because you need 5 grams of potassium through the day, which is a very impractical amount to get. So that is a good tool at your disposal, and you could mix salt into that as well. The other secondary and sometimes goal of the intra-workout nutrition window is intaking a fast digesting carb. What's that going to look like? It's probably going to look like either dextrose or highly branched cyclic dextrin if you can afford them. That being said, unless your training is extremely rigorous or you're in a caloric deficit, you probably don't need to be intaking carbohydrates while you train. Those are the 2 first exceptions that come to mind, and then the third exception would be someone whose training takes an excessively long time. So if you're a strongman doing event training, having a fast digesting carb mixed into your intra-workout might be a very wise idea for you. But if you're doing regular powerlifting or bodybuilding training and the workouts aren't not that long or are not that overall energetically taxing, like a powerlifting workout where you're spending a very large portion of your time resting, this is largely unnecessary, and you might be just wasting some of your daily calories on more or less a useless liquid calorie, especially if you're someone who likes your food and would like to eat more solid food while maintaining a body weight. And then the last feeding window that we have to look at is post-workout. This doesn't need to happen immediately after training, especially if you had a relatively reasonable amount of protein in your pre-workout meal. The research is pretty definitive that there is no anabolic window, and more or less, as long as you eat within a few hours of finishing training, our results are going to be pretty similar. The one thing that you might benefit from timing is in taking carbohydrates prior to or post-training. Your body is going to be more efficient refilling your intramuscular glycogen stores. Long story short, and that might help you with your recovery. Basically, you're a little bit more sensitive to those carbohydrates you intake right after training, and they're more likely to be shuttled straight into muscular glycogen stores. So that's going to be our first and foremost goal, is refilling those intramuscular glycogen stores by intaking a relatively fast digesting carb. As always, I'm just going to put rice as my example because that digests quickly and easily for the vast majority of people. The second thing we're going to do is, this is just another protein feeding window. We're going to have that same relatively even amount of protein we space throughout the day. If your workout took any reasonable amount of time, it's probably time to eat again. You're going to intake another round of protein. And once again, the final one will be a relatively low fat with this meal as well. We don't want this taking forever to digest if one of our goals is to refill our intramuscular glycogen stores as quickly as we can. So I hope this helped. Took my best shot at it. If you have any questions, put them in the comments.